Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I'm Noreen Kennedy with the United States Council for International Business. Welcome to this side event on business leadership on the global stocktake, catalyzing investment while prioritizing a just transition. USCIB, my organization, is a organization that represents American companies in the multilateral system. We're active in the United Nations, in the OECD, and we're celebrating our 30th anniversary in the UNFCCC process. So we're very glad to have you here with us. We really want to thank our co-sponsors, co-organizers at this event, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, IPECA, CEOE, and CII. I want to thank everyone for joining us, and especially to our distinguished speakers for sharing their time and expertise to discuss business leadership on the global stocktake. We're going to organize this event in two sessions. First, we'll talk about the role of business contributions and leadership in the GST, and then in our second session, we'll dive into the topic of just transition and what business can do, and already is doing, to meet the needs to meaningfully move forward towards a just energy transition. I want to highlight three things that we already know about business and the global stocktake. First, it is critically important that already active implementation efforts from business are considered in global stocktake discussions. The private sector is arguably the primary implementation partner for climate mitigation and adaptation efforts, and this needs to be properly reflected in the GST outcomes. Secondly, there is a unique opportunity at COP28 to highlight and advance business engagement in the political phase of the GST, with a view to developing a second generation of impactful and effective NDCs, nationally determined contributions, that engage private sector innovation, investment, and ability to scale action. And finally, we know that the first global stocktake has shown us that we're very far off track. We have a long way to go, and that there is an urgent need to scale up action, not just by governments, but also by what the UNFCCC refers to in not very elegant language as subnational actors, which is to say cities and states, who have already been making demonstrable and far-reaching progress, looking ahead to investments in green energy, clean technology, implementing initiatives and actions to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and spur the clean energy transition, working with the private sector and other members of their communities. And indeed, this has been a COP for important announcements, and we're absolutely thrilled to be part of another important announcement. We have the immense honor to be joined today by the governor of beautiful New Mexico, Ms. Michelle Lujan Grisham. The governor is with us today, and we should give her a round of applause for sure. She's showing real dedication being here. She's been here for 7 days, which is really commendable. Not many people put in the time, so we really appreciate that. And she's with us today to make a groundbreaking announcement to advance clean energy and economic development. It is my pleasure to welcome Governor Lujan Grisham and her team to the stage. Please, the floor is yours.
Great. Well, listen, Noreen, let me first, by the way, I'm Marty Durbin. I'm with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. I'm president of our Global Energy Institute and Senior Vice President for Policy. And Noreen, I want to first, a big shout out to you, thanks to you and to USCIB and all of our business partners for not only representing the U.S. business community, but the global business community when it comes to COP. We know that you personally and your whole team are trusted and respected and are out there all year, working on the items, the negotiated items that are not only important to the business community, but are important to us having effective climate action, moving forward. So again, I will just highlight and echo what Noreen was saying about the importance and the critical role that the business community is playing and must play, as we move forward. And just a quick shout out as well to our host government, the UAE. They, from the start, said they would ensure that this was going to be an inclusive COP, and they've made good on that promise. The business community is not only at the table. I think we're being viewed by them and many others as a critical partner here. So moving to the real excitement here, and it's my pleasure to join Governor Lujan Grisham of New Mexico, the 32nd governor of New Mexico, and the first Democrat Latina elected as governor in U.S. history. Now, it's particularly when we think about the COP, and climate change, Governor has shown real leadership as she's co-chair of the U.S. Climate Alliance. And I know earlier in the week you were with them. They were making announcements as well. But I think importantly, back at home, the governor has a reputation for working closely with industry and NGO stakeholders to get things done. I will tell you that my friend and colleague who runs the New Mexico Chamber of Commerce, Rob Black, tells us all the time that he considers you a great partner for the business community. Again, you've taken that and made some real progress in the state, not only setting greenhouse gas targets, statewide, passing an Energy Transition Act yourself, and then recently passing both clean car and clean truck standards. So you put your money where your mouth is. You get things done, and that's across. We're just talking about the energy environment here, but that's true with education and economic development. With your work, New Mexico is now one of the fastest growing states in a lot of work. But the only other thing I would add, she did serve 3 terms in Congress, and during that time was chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. I had the pleasure of working with the caucus in my role as well. But as I turn things over, I just want to say that the announcement you're making here really highlights the possibilities when government can work with the business community to help facilitate and to provide some upfront funding to get really important work done. So please, let me turn things over to you.
Well, Marty, thank you very much. I have to say, when Marty was introducing me again and said I had quite a reputation, I got a little nervous. But thank you. It turned out great. So I'm hoping that this announcement has the same impact. And I really also appreciate your highlighting our environmental work. I mean, the state is long known for incredible airspace and blue skies. We have the fastest growing outdoor recreation economic set of industries in the Southwest and one of the top in the nation. And making sure that our air, land, and water is safeguarded for New Mexicans, but also a kind of clean energy, clean startup, pristine place for future New Mexicans is really important to us. And even if it wasn't, the responsibility that we all share in the United States and beyond to figure out resolutions and opportunities to every problem. And quite frankly, I'm here, I promise I'll get to that announcement, because we have a tendency to do one or the other. We need the business community to do something. We don't want the business community to do anything. Government's required to set the standards. Government involved means the standards will create or chill any kind of innovation. And so as long as we do this paradigm shift and we talk about how things are not mutually beneficial to both doing what we should be doing, being responsible, productive leaders in this space, and the notion that we can't grow future economies in a meaningful way is wrong. And so being here with the U.S. Chamber is incredibly exciting for me today, and is also quite an honor to reconnect with Marty. So here it is. You might have heard that New Mexico, right in the Southwest and part of the western states, is challenged by water. And frankly, many countries and many localities are equally challenged. The water they have, unsafe, dwindling supplies, and the fact that climate change with rising temperatures is creating very stressed water issues for any number of places, New Mexico included. And when you look at the rating, frankly, of the UAE and New Mexico, those water stressors in many ways are nearly identical. So the challenge has been that without enough water, and we can't replenish it because of climate change, we know that we're going to see a 25% reduction in a state that, as you mentioned, we have a desire to grow responsibly. This disconnect means we're done. Unless we decide as an arid state that we're going to create a strategic water reserve. And the interesting thing about that is that I would assume that most people before today, when I uttered that phrase, strategic water reserve, means that we're not going to utilize any fresh water and that we're just going to figure out no water use industries. Well, that's going to be a problem for a state that's clear that it's the fifth. It depends actually on the moment that I say this, so you'll have to forgive me. But we're in the top 10 always right now for the last couple years running in both employment and economic growth. And for a small, poor state, those two things usually don't go hand in hand. So the notion would be is that we're just going to do more protections for fresh water. And while those are sound, and the value statement here is that we're going to protect that water for future New Mexicans because our strategic water reserve is $500 million identified and pledged to the private sector. So we're technology agnostic. What we want you to do is to clean up produced water, which is a byproduct of our oil and gas industry. And we have sizable brackish water reserves, frankly, nearly statewide. So we are going to turn water that's waste, which is a problem, into a commodity for things like renewable energy, solar, wind, EV, hydrogen, every single kind of transition. We are strategic about that commodity. We give a fixed long-term, say 30-year contract to any number of companies who provide the technology to identify that water, to clean that water up, and to use it in chip manufacturing, solar manufacturing. And the lithium from those processes gives us a jump start on all the EV, after you mentioned our clean car and truck standards. And on the heels of that, we hope to be announcing very soon the passage of clean fuel standards. This is innovation in my mind at its best. It's a recognition that our future growth and development is dependent on smart water ideas. And three, it uses and harnesses the power of the private sector. So first movers using the marketplace, following in large part the federal design with the Inflation Reduction Act, that you set not only a set of targets, but you provide resources so that your business community can be a full partner. So we're incredibly excited about this. We believe that we'll get a $250 million marker out of the legislature through bonding capacity in this session, the next 250 and the next. If any of my legislators are watching this in real time, I'm happy to take all 500 all at once. But the point here is we will have sufficient resources and a number of companies interested in this challenge and the opportunity to segue their investments into other economic growth in the state. And then the last point, which I've made, but I want to make it again. It's a signal to New Mexicans that their fresh water, which belongs to them, the fundamental right they have, is protected. And we're not making draconian decisions about water for a community or jobs and assuming that we'll just limp along. And we have communities that run out of water. For the first time, the Rio Grande River, which runs through the central part of the state, our major above-ground water source, ran dry. These are not going to be anomalies. They're going to be the status quo. This shifts that reality and creates opportunities for 50 to 100 years for the West, for the Southwest, for New Mexico, for the country, and brings the kind of renewable energy, clean energy sets of technology and innovations and investment that frankly nobody does better than when the private sector marries government and figures out a way to create opportunity and solve problems.
Actually, well, Governor, what you've highlighted, we all know, and it's evident here, that climate is about so many parts of our lives. So it's energy, it's water, it's health, it's biodiversity. And you got a project here that is leaning into all of those. A bold project using innovation to address both the economic and environmental challenges in partnership with the private sector. So I can't thank you enough for joining us here to make that announcement. and please count us as partners in helping you to succeed.
Well, I'm very excited about this announcement. I hope people are too, and I hope it signals to some other regions in the world that we can go faster and further in our quest for renewable, clean energy, advanced energy work if we use strategies like this. So thank you for allowing me to make this announcement, and thank you for letting me highlight that the U.S. Commerce is an incredible leader, and the next couple of panels are going to indicate that even further. Thank you all so very much.
Excellent. Please join me. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. So great. Anytime.
What an inspiring partnership. Really, really honored to have heard about it here. It's clear that working together with government, and not just federal government, is going to be a key element in delivering a second round of more ambitious and more inclusive and more effective nationally determined contributions. We're now going to turn to our first panel, and I'd like to invite our moderator and panelists up to the table here. So could you please come up, and I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Okay, hello. So welcome to this round table. We're still waiting for one of our panelists, Roberto, that I hope will be here soon. My name is Cristina Rivero, and I am the Director for Industry, Energy, Environment and Climate at the Spanish Confederation of Employers and Industries. And I have the pleasure to share the table where we are talking about the progress on the global stocktake and the business contributions and leadership. And I have the pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Michael Button, Senior Policy Manager at the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change and former head of the UNFCCC Climate Finance Negotiations for the UK COP26 presidency. Michael leads the real economy policy work at the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. He supports the development of IIGCC positions on real economy policy frameworks at the UK, EU, and international levels. And he helps members to understand the implications for their wider activities. He joined IIGCC in 2022, having previously been head of the UNFCCC Climate Finance Negotiations for the UK COP26 presidency and held several international policy roles in the UK civil service. Welcome, Michael. And I also have the pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Pravir Deshmukh, Senior Counselor at the Confederation of Indian Industry. Pravir has around 18 years of work experience in the field of biodiversity, environment management, and climate action. His expertise includes the area of biological diversity, Act and environment regulations, and sustainable value chain. I can see Roberto, who's joining us. At the Confederation of Indian Industry, he leads the climate action and nature conservation portfolios and works with Indian businesses on integrating climate and nature loss risk in decision making. And I also have the pleasure to welcome Mr. Roberto Suarez. Roberto was appointed Secretary General of the International Organization of Employers on 2018, having held the post of Deputy Secretary General since December 2012. Prior to joining the IOE, Roberto was ILO Program Director for the promotion of youth employment in the Maghreb region. He previously worked, like me, at the Spanish Confederation of Employers Organizations in areas ranging from comparative labor policies and labor relations to youth, unemployment, and social and employment policy. He was Business Europe's Vice President for Labor Affairs for several years, and also Vice President of Business at OECD's Employment and Labor Affairs Committee, and a member of various follow-up committees for the European Social Fund and the EU Economic and Social Committee. Roberto's experience extends to academia, having served as Associate Professor of the European Social Law at both the Universidad Complutense de Madrid and the Universidad Pontificia de Comillas in Spain. Roberto is a lawyer with experience in European and international labor law, as well as in international relations. So I am starting with a question for Roberto. Roberto, IOE is the largest private sector network in the world. You represent 50 million businesses through 150 national employers organizations. This provides you, for sure, with unique insights and expertise on what the private sector needs to be empowered to lead on climate negotiation and adaptation efforts. In this table, we are looking towards the global stocktake and the business inputs. Could you share your perspective on what business leadership and contributions look like? In what ways is business globally contributing to moving us forward to the Paris Agreement?
Well, it's a very broad question, and thank you for inviting me to this panel. I also have to say, well, of course, thank you to all the host organizations, including, of course, USAIB, and also all of you for engaging in this panel. I have to say that our engagement as business organization has been very much on just transitions. That's the area where we have been very much deepening in the last year, because we have an important role in the International Labour Organization, but also an important role with other UN agencies related to the social impact of climate change. And if you tell me, and if you ask me, what's the business concerns and how business are moving forward, the agenda for a more sustainable future and how they are engaging in climate change action, I have to say that the diversity of actors in the business community doesn't make us easy to have a common and cohesive approach. And that's frankly the case in many of our business organizations. Last year we were in Egypt, and we were very much engaged with the Egyptian industry organization, our main partner. And you can notice there that the main challenge has to do with the huge informality and huge informal sector, meaning weak institutions, lack of access to finance, meaning corruption, meaning also a kind of lack of awareness from private sector actors, but also, and we have to be a little bit vocal on that, bad policies that have not been framed properly and are not addressing the real needs of business to transform deeply the business model. So from their side, the main point is how really we can make these policies to be much better framed. And also the same, if you go with our members in Bangladesh, where they have strong issues, they're already suffering climate change, job destruction, for instance, and where you could see really that the policies are not there. So on their side, rather than being so much involved with a green skills or green approach agenda like the one that you have in the European Union, you have a completely different setting. You can have a completely different mindset. Some of them are surviving, struggling to survive, and the approach they have to us is we need the means to survive after COVID, to survive after this geopolitical environment, And I know, and we know that we have to transform deeply our business model, but we will never get there if we do not tackle properly the reality of the informal sector. If you go to other countries where you have much more developed policies, regulations, so the main approach is we are already committing, and you see companies innovating in a kind of intensive manner, and also very, very encouraging manner on the area of CO2 decarbonization, but also in the area of innovation, supporting governments also with private partnerships. But at the end of the day, also the main concern that we see and we notice is that they perceive that this is a global game. It's not a local game just for European companies or for USA business. And if you do not move globally, you will not get there, which places our organization in a role which is not easy. Meaning by that, how we can shape a global agenda right now, whereas the diversity of countries is also having a big challenge in the negotiations that are taking place now. Right now, we have a discussion and negotiation in these days, and it's going to be resumed at 7 o'clock on just transitions, and the information that we have is that precisely this dilemma between the G77 and developed economies is there on how you frame it in a manner that takes into consideration and integrates the real needs of developing economies vis-a-vis developed economies. This perhaps is not the answer you were waiting, but this is the reality, the daily reality that we suffer as large business sector. And I also have to tell you that many of these organizations in developing economies have capacity building necessity that has not been addressed, and we are trying to help them through several means, but they are not really up to be pushing for a strong sustainability agenda because themselves are weak or don't have the capacity. So those are the areas we want to work, and we are really serious in our engagement. But I have to tell you, it's not always easy. I mean, but that's why we are also here.
And a very important point, the need to be conscious of the diversity between countries, but also in different sectors. No? Not every sector is in the same starting position. Michael, you have an impressive background. You have previously served as the head of Switzerland Trade Policy and the UK Department for International Trade, and was also the head of the UNFCCC climate finance negotiations for the UK presidency of the COP26. With your extensive experience in trade, finance, and international climate policy, how do you see the role of business contributions to the global stocktake? You wrote, in fact, the response on behalf of IIGCC to the global stocktake. In what ways did you consider the role of private sector, both in terms of financial contributions, but maybe also in other areas?
Yeah, of course, and thank you, Christina, and the other fellow panelists. I think the headline response to that, and I'll go into a bit more detail, is business and investors need to be very clear in terms of the message they're giving, right? Which is, from my perspective, a lot has happened since the Paris Agreement was signed in 2015. And a lot of action. The IEA published a report earlier this year that said that the current policy scenarios were likely going to peak fossil fuel demand in a couple of years' time. That is such a big change to where we were in 2015. But it's also not enough, and it's also very far from where we need to be. Because then it peaks and it plateaus. And actually, if you look at the science, you then need to see a very sharp decline. And there's lots of difficulties in how you get there, and just transition and equity are a fundamental part of that. And so I think when we talk about how can businesses engage and contribute, I think there's three things. One is showcase leadership and establish credibility, because you'll only be listened to if you're seen as being credible. The second is the finance and investment element, what you bring to the table. And then the third is advocacy. And to go through them in turn, showcasing leadership. So I come from IRGCC, Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. We're an organisation that has over 400 members of institutional investors, asset managers, asset owners, pension funds, etc., representing about 60 trillion euros in assets under management. And of that, over 300 of our investor members have set a net zero target. Now, that's a very important first step, but the real key is then how you go about implementing it and establish credible pathways to implement it. And we work with the investment community to develop frameworks on how they're going to do that. We also engage with other networks and the investors in corporate engagement. So, investors own equity in a lot of corporations. How do they engage with the corporations they're invested in to help and support them in the transition? So that's very important too. And being clear what businesses and investors are doing when you come to COP, that means that people will listen to you in the context of ambition. And I know that from being a former negotiator. In terms of finance and investment, the IEA is also super clear, right? They reckon 70% of the investment needed for the global energy transition will need to come from the private sector, at least. And so how do you respond to that to build the new green economy? And actually, again, the IEA World Energy Outlook from this year reckons that perhaps you've turned a corner there. $170 trillion invested last year in renewable energy. That's really positive. It needs to scale up. The other side of the coin is also that 100 trillion is in fossil fuels. And from the IGCC perspective, it's not about sort of turning that off straight away. Absolutely not. You have to make sure the transition is just, and you need to make sure that there's engagement with the corporates. But there is a clear direction you need to go in. And so how can we partner together, and how businesses and investors helping to move things in the right direction? And that is being clear on what policy is needed to do that for businesses and investors in a range of different circumstances. And that comes on to my final point of advocacy. Be clear what's needed to drive the change. And that is in the context of the COP. It's an ambitious response to the global stocktake, a commitment to update NDCs, but not just set high-level targets. Set detailed plans that engage businesses and investors in how you're going to do that. Because we hear about tripling renewables, doubling energy efficiency, all very important, but if they just remain at the UN level, it doesn't actually help us that much. It's how do you translate those into national action? And I think that's the real thing that we will, the success of this COP will be measured on what happens to that in 2, 3, 7 years' time when we get to 2030 and then on to 2050.
Difficult transfer.
Exactly.
Pravir, you are Vice Chairman of the Confederation of Indian Industries Renewable Energy Council and founder and CEO of O2 Power. Could you please share with us the challenges and opportunities that Indian companies are facing when it comes to transitioning towards more sustainable operations in support of the Paris Agreement? In your view, what does business need from government to be able to be efficient implementation partners?
First of all, thanks for all partners to actually bid for this side event, and I think this is a very critical topic. I think the first part is again what is happening right now. Lots of businesses has committed for climate transitions. I think the target is much more strongly focused before 2050. But again, if we are taking the consideration at a state India level or at a national level, there's still that their commitment is not part of that under the global stocktake discussions or the analysis part. So I think that is a very critical part, how the nations can integrate that business commitment as a part of the NDCs, how their actions to be a part of these NDCs. At present, what is happening in India, it is more focusing on only the solar part, that how much renewable energy we are putting in the grid. But there are non-grid connectivities. Industries are doing lots of things in reducing their energy requirements or performance enhancements. So I think that also need to be integrated into the decision making, because that will give us a clear picture that how what is happening at a state level or at a national level and what policies will be required. I think another important factor is I think today the Industry Transition Accelerator has been launched, where it is more focusing on hard to abate sector or the sectors which is very critical for climate transitions or climate actions. So I think this is the first time something they are got on the board of the UNFCCC, or they are discussing all these issues. They are ready to commit on it. So I think near about 60 global businesses already committed for this charter, and they are developing a very measurable target in the next 2 years or so. So I think this type of learnings are very important, and if we have this global stock take in a very better way or a very structured way, I think the policies can be built in a much better way at a national level and at also global level. So I think that might be an opportunity for businesses because the data is more coherent. They are able to use that thing and analyze that what is happening, how they can invest, or they can look for an investment from outside because they will know exactly what way path they have to follow. So I think that might be an opportunity for businesses through the global because they are the just transition issues because the employees or the employers, which is part of their system, they are not capable of going for a totally a new system. So I think that is also an important area, but it will be a critical opportunities for all of the business sectors. And definitely the financing part, how the MDBs can also fund businesses, because I think that is a very critical area. Lots of fund is available.
In the end, in capacity building, as I said before, good pedagogical and persuasive approach, and then also being clear on what is expected from them based on this global stockage. And I want also to refer that engaging with business is not just, I know that 75% of the financing also to get there also has to come from the private sector. It is not just about financing, it's about expertise. It's about putting there also some in-kind resources that sometimes are underestimated to make a difference for private-public partnerships. And we see that on a daily manner. In terms of skills, again, we say, I don't know what's the exact figure this year, but not more than 40% of the NDCs refer to skills action plans. And the shortage on green skills is there right now, or will be there in a few years, even in a few months, according to the last report, including the linkage report we are working with. So don't underestimate that companies and the private sector has lost.
Businesses, and particularly SMEs, and particularly in the developing world or emerging markets, have been very conscious of for a long time, but in this process has not gotten enough light shone on it. It's not been focused enough, and I think now from the GST process and from the Egyptian presidency last year, that's been elevated, and investors are now starting to stand up and pay attention how to mobilize finance to that. And it's challenging, but it's possible. And I think the third thing is coming back to national plans, the NDCs, but also national adaptation plans. How do you reflect what's agreed here, hopefully a good outcome in those plans and specific policies? So I mean, you mentioned grids. There was a report again from the IEA earlier this year that reckoned that by 2040, so not that long, we need to either build or refurbish about 80 million kilometers of grids. That is the same amount of grid that we have built in the past 100 years. And that is, that is a much shorter amount of time. So that is a really big challenge. How do you do that? What I would say also, this is an opportunity for there to be learning shared between countries, because in India and in China and other developing countries, it's actually much quicker to get grid connections for renewables than it is in Europe and the US at this point in time. And so it's, I think you can often get into this process, maybe it's, okay, how can developing and emerging markets sort of learn from developing? Actually, no, it's both ways, right? But the right policies are really important. I think you mentioned this earlier, Roberto, around consultation, build the expertise from businesses and from SMEs with businesses and investors, and that includes skills. And that's the skill shortage. It's not just in the emerging world. It's in Europe as well, right? Like if you look at the barriers to solar installations, to wind installations, it's there, and that's at the local level how you address that. I'll be very quick on 2 points. One, also be clear on the nuances of all this. There's the just transition, and there's also that the pathways for different countries to how we get to net zero globally are not the same. And that's because there's different points around equity, historic responsibility, different starting points. And I think it's very easy for an investor to decarbonize their portfolio by pulling out of all investment in high-emitting sectors, by pulling out of all investment in emerging economies, but that doesn't help anyone, right? So how do you invest in those sectors, but do it in a way that gets us towards our end goal? And then finally, I think the really clear thing for business and investment community is consistent and clear advocacy. So ambition and 1.5, the temperature goal of the Paris Agreement, and adaptation resilience is our North Star. And then businesses and business organizations engage and advocate on how best to get there and how to do that in the context of equity, just transition, but also getting there as quickly as we can. So I think, if we can do all that in some form, that will benefit the process and benefit implementation.
I perfectly agree with
Sorry.
yeah. I think both the speakers has definitely talked about the just transitions and all these things. I think the business are definitely a very critical role. And again, I think what will happen that, again, the institutions like us, industry associations also need to take an action or target on it. So CII in the last 2 years also taken an climate action target that most of our business should have a commitment on the nature or the climate, and they have a measurable targets on it. So I think that might be a way to engage them, because again, when we are communicating them about what is climate actions, which are the different steps are required, how MSMEs can be a part. So in CII, what we did during the COVID season or COVID years, we developed a very simple initiative for MSME sectors, which is only have a 4 commitment. But again, for that commitment, we are actually supporting them that how you can access your GHG emissions, you can assess your vulnerability to climate change. And what we have found it out into last 2-3 years that the GHG emission calculation is much easy. Every companies are doing, every MSMEs can easily drive on that aspect. But again, the vulnerability part, it is not altogether there. We didn't know what will happen. So recently the flood in Chennai, I think it's just yesterday. This type of modeling is not available in India, or I think it is not available in most of the countries, maybe mostly in the developing countries or global south. So how this GST, the global Stocktake or the modeling can help us in actually analyzing this sector specific or site specific risk areas, I think that will also important for investment in the supply MSMEs or industrial infrastructure, because I think now lots of companies are definitely thinking about really I need to go for additional expansion in coastal areas, or I need to shift my new operations into the new areas. That definitely required lots of cost, huge risk. The skilling part is also important, because in some of the areas the skills has already developed. People didn't want to move from one area to another area. So I think this all is very critical. It is all linked, it is not separate. But I think structuring all these things will definitely help us in investment planning, planning for the employer awareness and policies, actions and all these things. So I think this is very critical step. I think business should be a very forefront of this thing, because it have a huge impact on businesses. If the, for example, if the operation is closed for one day, it is a huge loss for business, because he has to pay the employee cost, he has to manage the cost, and again, if the damage cost is there, that is again additional insurance charges will be increased. So I think that part also need to be understood very clearly, that what challenges, how investment can be planned, and the awareness that it is beyond GHG emissions, it is beyond the risk what they are facing in the future years if we are not making the overall actions as a cumulative part in that area.
Thank you. You raised many important issues, no? A full range of issues in the agenda of the private sector. We need pedagogy, be conscious of the diversity, we need data, information, inclusiveness, engage local communities, but also especially SMEs, clear objectives and assessment, skills, engage business, not only from the financing point of view, but also expertise and innovation, and not only mitigation, also in adaptation, and especially just transition. So many important things you've raised and points. Thank you for your insights, and we run out of time. It's a pity, but we need to give the floor to the next roundtable. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, please thank our wonderful moderator and panelists for their insights. That was really great. And we covered a lot of ground there, and we're going to now zero in, if we can use that term, on just one piece of the different points that were raised, the opportunities and realities that go into the global stocktake. And what I'm talking about now is, of course, the just transition. So I'd like to invite our next group of panelists up. We're going to be discussing business leadership, meeting needs for progress on the just transition. So if I could ask Isabel and our panelists to just come up to the front, and we'll get underway.
Thank you for the opportunity for USCIB and all the other partner organizations to be able to be here today. I represent IPICA, which is the Oil and Gas Industry Association for Advancing Social Performance and Sustainability across the energy industry. This is a very important topic for us to deliver just transition and supporting our members. So I'm delighted to be here today. I would like to introduce our esteemed panelists this evening. So I am going to start with Mr. Anibal Kraga, who is the Executive Secretary of the African Refiners and Distributors Association. Mr. Kraga is currently the Executive Secretary of the African Refiners and Distributors Association, the first ever Pan-African organization for the downstream oil and gas sector in Africa. Prior to that position, he was the Chief Operating Officer for the Refiners and Petrochemicals Directorate for the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. Welcome, Anibal. Have to say Anibal is also a member of IPICA, so delighted to have you here tonight. Mr. Julián Martínez Bejarano, Just Transition Institute of Spain. Julián Martínez is Technical Advisor at the Just Transition Institute, the branch of the Ministry of Ecological Transition and Democratic Challenge of Spain, in charge of the implementation of the Just Transition Strategy and ensuring just transition for territories affected by coal phased out. Julián holds a bachelor's degree in international relations from University Loyola Andalucía and a master's in environmental policy from Sciences Po in Paris. Welcome, Julián. Lastly, Mr. Jorge Pina, who is Environmental Officer of Endesa. Mr. Pina is currently Head of Environment at Endesa. He has dedicated the last 15 years to holding different positions of responsibility related to the environment and climate change, including a stay at the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at MIT. He holds a bachelor's in mining engineer. So welcome to the three of you. I'm going to start with Mr. Kraga. And a question in relation to, you have done a lot of important work on the topic of the just energy transition and the special considerations needed for the global south. Perhaps most importantly, you're a strong advocate for the need to tailor the energy solutions to Africa to meet their unique needs of the continent. So there's no one size fits all. From your perspective, could you share a bit about the specific challenges and opportunities for Africa when it comes to just transition and energy broadly?
Thank you very much, Isabel, and thank you to the organizers for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening. I think fundamental point is you have to have energy to transition. So if we don't have energy in Africa, what are we transitioning to? I think, we had and also the way the panels were run tonight, I think is actually reflective of that. We talked about the global stocktake before just transition. I think it should be flipped. We should be talking about what is required because every part of the country, of the world has a different trajectory. If you break down cumulative CO2 emissions to date, biggest contributors have been the EU with 33%, followed by North America and Asia with 29% each. All of Africa combined, 2.73%. When you back out North and South Africa, the remaining 48 countries have only contributed 0.55 of the emissions. So we're not actually the polluters. So the question is, how can you have a one-size-fits-all? If you're talking of the kind of investment, so that's on one part. Then let's talk about, and this is a real opportunity because the global stocktake, this is the first time this is happening, right? And it's going to set the NDCs and everything for 2025. But if you read what, I believe his name is Ani Dasgupta, the president and CEO of the World Resource Institute, who's in charge of the global stocktake, who's going to present what the business leaders are going to look at in making investments, right? He's very clear. Carbon emissions are up. They're still climbing. If you close 3 coal-fired power plants in Europe, 14 sub-Saharan African countries can follow their least development opportunities going forward. We need to look at this whole point of reframing the climate justice approach. And the reason I say this is this. For Africa to progress on this journey, the leading capital comes from development finance institutions. But they are hamstrung today because they're not allowed to invest in the kind of project that Africans really want. So if you agree that 1 in 2 people born between now and 2040 is going to be African, if you agree that our energy demand is going to grow by 45% between now and 2040, what we really need right now is cleaner air to start with. We have 11 different grades of diesel ranging from 10 parts per million to 10,000 parts per million. Everybody out in the rest of the world uses 10 ppm. We have 12 different grades of gasoline. So if you ask me, we're all going to die of respiratory issues and have a public health issue before we can even get to energy transition. We need LPG right now, LPG for clean cooking. I tell everybody, you say no financing for African countries to move forward. I say, let's turn off all these lights, turn off the air conditioning, and start having a couple of barbecues so we can all choke, and then decide whether wind is what we need first as an investment. I tell people that what we need actually is to look at what Africa and other developing nations need first and have that in the conversation as part of what the investments need to be. Please also note that presently, the way a lot of the bigger companies, especially these, fits all on us because we're the 2.73% contributors. So we need a fit-for-purpose, decade-by-decade energy transition plan and a financing plan that supports that so we can actually meet obligations and have investments that meet our particular needs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anibor, for providing such a compelling and perspective on what sort of the Africa region need. I'm going to hand over to Julian. And you represent, Julian, the Just Transition Institute in Spain. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work in terms of how Spain is, what is Spain's vision to advance a just energy transition and what efforts you have undertaken?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me and having me here. Of course, Spain is in a very different situation in the energy transition. And the scenario right now in Spain is that we are producing almost half of our electricity with renewable energy sources, and we are living for decades to produce electricity alone. Right? So for us, a just transition is a transition where we optimize the benefits of the transition, but also a transition where we mitigate the effects on territories and workers affected by this transition. So for this, we elaborated a just transition strategy, and the first materialization of the strategy was social dialogue. And in particular, we signed tripartite agreements with companies, we have one of them here represented, and trade unions. And this was fundamental in Spain, because this meant that we had a coal phase-out organized and, let's say, agreed with all involved actors, with all involved stakeholders. And this agreement, for example, in the case of the agreement for coal power plants, as Endesa is part of it, in this agreement, the national government, of course, committed to the deployment of support instruments for affected territories, for coal regions, but the companies committed to new investments in these areas in order to create new economic activities other than coal, to continue to produce and generate wealth and jobs in these areas. And trade unions, of course, committed to being part of this process, to verify, to monitor, and to provide feedback into the kind of support instruments and measures that have to be taken. So, taking this into account of how different this scenario is compared to a typical laissez-faire scenario, where a coal power plant closes down, nothing has happened here, and we don't care. In this case, everyone, from trade unions to the national government to the very companies owning the coal power plants, are committing to a just transition for the very same areas. And what you were asking, what are we doing specifically in the national government? in the Just Transition Institute? Well, we are deploying these support instruments. And sometimes people ask us, so what's the key to a Just Transition? What has to be done? What's the specific thing that we have to pull? The answer is that there's no one size fits all. There's no magic one. We are investing in every different aspect of what we think is needed for Just Transition for this kind of regions. So we are launching support instruments for SMEs to support new investments and create new jobs. We are supporting economically municipal infrastructure projects so that we improve public services in various areas, and businesses and people want to stay in these areas. We are financially supporting the environmental restoration of abandoned coal mines, employing the coal miners that lost their jobs because of the closure of coal mines. And we are doing all of this in a context of social participation. So in each coal region, in each Just Transition area, we launched public participation processes. So everyone from NGOs, local governments, local businesses, etc., could participate and give us ideas, proposals, projects, so that we designed our support instruments in a way that responded to the reality of the territories. One very interesting support instrument we launched was something called Just Transition Tenders. And for this, let's think about what happens when a coal power plant closes down. The electricity capacity in the network, in the electricity network that a coal power plant is using is free. So new renewable energy projects can request access to the grid, connect, and produce renewable energy. All right, fine enough. The problem here is that renewable energies at the very local level where you have the plants don't create that much jobs as a coal power plant would do. So we launched, instead of freeing the capacity of coal power plants, we reserved this electricity capacity, and instead of allocating this capacity in chronological order of request, which is the conventional process in Spain and in the European Union, we tendered this capacity. To whom? To the projects that offer the best Just Transition solution to those areas. The projects that took with them new industries, new social services, that cooperated with local agricultural activities. So basically, the project, the offer that created most jobs in the coal region where you had mines and coal power plants closing down, that project would be allocated electricity capacity to produce energy and, of course, make money with it. And Endesa here was the awarding company, and the result, I won't spoil your presentation, Jorge.
No, it's fine. I won't have to speak too much.
But the result was that with Endesa's project and this innovative way of looking at electricity access, with this project, more jobs will be created through renewable energies and associated industries than were present in the coal power plant in that region. And I think that's amazing. And this is also interesting from a policy perspective because the cost for the Spanish government of doing this was zero. Well, it was our blood, tears, and sweat, but we didn't give support, economic support in this case. There was no state aid involved in this. It was just an innovative way of looking at electricity access. And I want to finish with this because I think I'm running out of time. Let's think about this in terms also of business leadership, which is the topic of this panel. I think a key lesson in Spain is that we are on the right path towards Just Transition. We still have a lot of work to do, but I think we are in the right path because of social dialogue and because of involving companies in the process. for Endesa and other signing companies of the tripartite agreements, looking for new investments was an obligation. But it is also paying off. So when you promote business leadership and you set up carrot and stick instruments, the solutions can be very positive for all stakeholders involved. And also, I think this is a signal for companies not to wait for the phase out of fossil fuels. You need to anticipate, and in doing so, you can really benefit from the transition. And that's a lesson from Endesa. Endesa was one of the heaviest, one of the companies with the heaviest use of coal in Spain. And now you have a 1.5 billion renewable energy projects going on in a coal region in southern Spain. Yeah. So, with that example, I will pass the.
Thank you so much, Julian. And I think it's such a great example, and something I remember even last COP has featured as one of the blueprints in terms of what Spain is doing in this space. So, and really partnership in action with Endesa. So I'm going to pass over to Jorge, and probably based just on that new energy model based on clean energies and respect for the environment and sustainable development. Perhaps you can tell us more about one of your projects in Andorra, where you have been, I think, pioneering this. Over to you, please.
Okay, so good evening to everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity being here today. I think Julian pretty much set the framework, and I will try to give you some insights from my concrete, for the concrete project that is introduced. Let me start by a little background. Endesa is a Spanish utility, part of the Enel group. The company was founded in the year 1944, and it was founded with the main purpose of taking advantage of national coal resources. As part of this, in the year 1980, Andorra Power Plant entered in operations. The plant operated for 40 years, contributing to approximately 40% of local GDP and generating employment in both coal mining business and also directly on the power plant. In the year 2015, after Paris Agreement, the company decided to accelerate its decarbonization process. And as part of this acceleration in the year 2020, Andorra Power Plant stopped operations and closed. And here the challenge was clear: how to combine our firm conviction with energy transition, our firm conviction with decarbonization, with our commitment to the territory, with our commitment to local communities. And the answer we gave to this challenge was Andorra Just Transition project. It's a project with two parts. You could actually say it's two projects in one. First project is the energy project. As Julian was explaining, we are taking advantage of the grid connection capacity available after the closure of the power plant, and we are taking advantage of this capacity to introduce renewable capacity. We are actually we are replacing 1,100 coal megawatts by 1,900 renewable megawatts. We are doing this through 7 hybrid projects, hybridization, solar, wind, and we are also installing 80 megawatts of storage and 15 megawatts electrolyzer. But this is only the first part of the project. The second part of the second project is our social economic plan, which transversally addresses all sectors of the economy, complementing the energy project in generating employment and wealthness for the region. Here we are developing more than 20 initiatives, as I said, in all 3 projects, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Very important to highlight the link between renewables and the primary sector. in each location in which we are developing one of these 7 hybrid projects we are doing. In each location, we are also developing a primary sector project from sustainable agriculture, sustainable livestock farming, or even honey production. I think it's very important, this link with the primary sector, because we are making sure that the entire community, we are developing, we are creating opportunities for the entire community, not just for the energy community. We also have on the secondary sector here. We are developing activities related to the renewable energy value chain. We have a project for solar trackers manufacturing plant, another project for electrolyzer manufacturing plant, and a project for wind turbines recycling plant. And on the tertiary sector, here we are looking at initiatives such as rural tourism, sustainable tourism, rural tourism, and local commerce, also complementing the project. The second axis of our social economic plan is training, and this is also very, very important. It is paramount that we make sure that everyone has an opportunity in the new context, that everyone can have an opportunity in this because of energy transition. The program we are developing, we call it Sustainable Energy School, and here we are giving training from energy, renewable energy plant assembly and maintenance to environmental monitoring or biodiversity conservation. We will have about 5,000 people benefiting for this training program. And the third axis on the social economic plan is promotion of self-consumption. And here there will be around 4,000 beneficiaries from this self-consumption project. I think it's important that they feel that part of this energy, that this richness that is being created in the area stays in the area, and we are making this through the self-consumption plan. We are speaking of a total investment of 1.7 billion euros, and we are expecting to create 6,300 jobs during construction phase and 500 jobs during operational phase. This is pretty much just transition project.
Thank you very much for sharing such a really interesting perspectives, and I think just the element around capacity building, I think of building trust around workers and communities, and how you have worked and pioneered the private sector. We have a few more minutes left before we end this panel. Just probably would like to ask my esteemed panelists if you have any other final remarks or comments that you want to make. I think any more you...
Well, thank you very much as well. I think fundamentally you can see there's a spectrum of situations, right? I just think my role is because I have to advocate for the fact that a just transition requires looking at, as you've seen, two very different situations where you're transitioning from having some kind of power to adapting. This is more adaptation. We're more mitigation, right? Which is we're low, we just have to switch up to cleaner sources. But we have to look at the fact that for this to happen, we have to have a seat at the table in terms of how this is done. And when you look at the global Stocktake, the three methods of implementation they have are finance, technology transfer, and capacity building. On the finance piece, we have to be allowed to have access to finance to transition in a way that makes sense for us in Africa, which starts with development finance institutions and also having access to financing along our pathway, all right? So as an example, what we're doing at ARDA is we're having our first ever ARDA investment forum next April, where we're looking at, from end to make projects bankable, getting all the key players, the regulators, the off-takers, the EPC producers, and the developers to the table to see, can we bring what energy transition means for Africa to get where we need to go. Secondly, technology transfer. When you're talking of just transition, I really must advocate must emplace the technology on the continent. We don't just want to be consumers of clean energy. We want to actually have research and development from the whole low carbon value chain. So, the last thing is capacity building. I can't stress this enough, because at the end of the day, we've had this end of the chain. The first thing is putting the right policies in place, where I guess we can learn from what has been done in Europe when the time comes. The right policies to drive this. But the next thing is definition of projects to deliver a unique African energy transition roadmap, which I think we can see that we need. Thereafter, of course, ESG, but then capacity development. We must have the people to execute these business plans to deliver this energy transition, right? And reskilling and upskilling people is a monumental task, particularly when, like I said, we don't have energy to begin with. So the kind of energy we need is very different. So fundamentally, I just want to highlight the fact that for business leadership to happen in a way that is, I think one of the last speakers said, it must be done with intent. It must be done intentionally. You have to recognize that we're in very different positions, and we must be allowed to follow our path as the 2.73% emitters that deliver. So all the technologies, please test them out in Spain. Because like I tell everyone, there was a time we all had landlines, and everybody invested in those, but we all use mobile phones now. So you guys can have the innovation that's more cost effective, and we have gotten to the stage where we have some baseline, but as the lowest emitters, we deserve the opportunity to get baseline energy in place, focus on energy poverty, allow us to do that, and let business leaders look at those as opportunities as we progress along the path to having more stable energy security. Because we must balance energy security with energy transition in this paradigm. And that's one of the things I've been happiest about this COP, because this is the first COP that we've had an NOC CEO as the president of COP, so he fully understands this balancing of energy security and energy transition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anibor, and the rest of my esteemed panelists. I think we've run out of time, but it's been a fascinating conversation and really providing two very different perspectives. Helped and make real progress on the just energy transition. And with that, I'm going to close this panel and hand over back to Noreen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. That was an excellent panel, and really thought-provoking and really focusing our minds at the end of a very long week. We're almost done with week one of COP28. We have some time for you to pose questions to our speakers, and we have roving mics. Agnes is available to take a mic over to anybody who would like to pose a question to any of our speakers or make a comment. And I'm looking with the light in my eyes. Somebody all the way in the back. Thank you so much. And could you just...
That company is dead, because that means that your competitors are making money out of energy, but are doing so in a just way. So your investors, and in this context, are really going to look about that. And also, there's a second benefit here, which is that also from the public administration, we are trying to incentivize companies to fulfill these commitments. One example is that next generation EU funds, European funds for the recovery after COVID, that are being invested heavily on renewable.
Begin to bring us to a close. We heard many important things today, and it's challenging to summarize them in the 5 minutes we have left, but let me make an observation and maybe it'll help tie this all together. So for those of us who follow the negotiations and have seen some of the papers that the hardworking government delegations are looking at with regard to the global stocktake, we don't see the word business mentioned very frequently. I think the current text had a mention of business only 2 times, which was an improvement over the previous one, which was only 1 time. But from what we've heard today, we see, and I think the message was very clear, that the business community is moving ahead anyway. We're not necessarily tapping our foot and waiting for the governments to decide, and we're even speaking with governments, as we heard from the governor of New Mexico, to find partnerships and ways forward. I think a very important second point came from Mr. Kraga when he made the connections between just transition and the global stocktake and which one comes. We make it happen. So I think we have a real opportunity to make that happen, to speak with our governments, to be active here, and also when we get home, this venture that we're all involved in is not just 2 weeks during the COP, but 365 days a year. I want to really thank the co-organizers. We're very fortunate to be part of the Major Economies Business Forum and have such terrific colleagues, Spanish Employers, CEOE, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, excellent partners, CII, IPICA, and many, many more. I also want to thank Agnes Vinblad, my colleague at USCIB, who leads our climate and environment work, for helping to put this together and take on this really massive portfolio. I want to thank the technical team who has been bearing with us, and I'm sure they've had an even longer day than any of us. So thank you so much for your great support. And I want to thank the audience. And with that, we're adjourned.